Let's talk about the Declaration of Independence. It is such an important founding document for our nation that really all of us, although we know little bits about it and we know little quotes from it, it is good for all of us to review periodically. So let's talk about the Declaration of Independence. All right, in this talk about the Declaration, we're going to do two separate lessons. One lesson is going to be this one here, where we're going to talk about the introduction and the resolution, the end, the beginning and the end of the Declaration. And then we'll do a second video that just discusses the grievances that we had against King George. And we'll talk more about that because that's such a big chunk of time. We can't get it all into one lesson. All right. So, what is the Declaration of Independence? It is our declaration of the 13 original colonies where they asserted their freedom from the rule of England in order to become a new nation. So the Declaration of Independence was written for three audiences. The first was King George, whose authority in England, the colonies felt like he was using his authority to abuse the colonies. And so they were addressing their grievances against him. The second audience for the Declaration of Independence were the American people. So, in each of the colonies, each American citizen needed to understand why we were declaring our independence from England. And they needed to create a vision for what they were going to do, breaking away from England and creating a new nation and a glimpse at what that new nation was going to look like. So it wasn't just independence from England, but independence to become this new nation. And it is going to be a new nation that looks like something. So this helped the Americans to be able to fight for their independence, to be willing to fight a war for that freedom. And then the third audience were other nations in the world, because those nations in the world needed to understand why the colonies had broken from England and formed their own nation, partly just so they would understand, but also the United States of America needed foreign countries to recognize the legitimacy of the new nation. And also, maybe they might help them out in their fight. All right, so that is the Declaration's three audiences. Now, let's talk about the parts of the Declaration of Independence. So, there are three parts of that declaration. And let's take a look at those three parts. You know, people in those days, and sometimes even today, like to write in threes. And, when you were in school, you probably did essays and you had an intro and then the body of the essay and then a conclusion. So there were three. So the human brain likes threes. Well, the Declaration of Independence is written in three sections. The first is the preamble. That's how things get started. The second part are the grievances against the king. And the third is the resolution. This is, we are resolved to do this. This is the action we are going to take. Now, the preamble begins with an introductory sentence, because all introductory paragraphs have an introductory sentence that tells what that paper is going to be about. So this Declaration of Independence has that same, introductory sentence. So this is a long sentence because, back in those days, they like to use lots of words. Now, if we wrote this again, in our present days, it would probably be half that length because we like to read it little succinct, tiny things. So In fact, when I was typing up the notes for this lesson, and I had the whole Declaration of Independence as part of my notes, I have a Grammarly that runs over my grammar to make sure that I have the right punctuation and grammar and things like that. It had all kind of corrections it wanted to make so that the declaration was in more modern English. So I kept having to dismiss, like, no, we don't mess with our founding documents. Anyway, all right. So the preamble to the Declaration of Independence, the introductory sentence that gets things kicked off, says, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America, when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with one another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. And so they are saying, this is we owe the world and we owe ourselves and we owe the king an explanation of why we believe that nature and nature's God have entitled us to this independence. And this requires us to go back and review some things about the history of the Declaration. All right, so the Declaration of Independence was the fruit, the child of the Continental Congress, which was meeting in Philadelphia. And when they tried to figure out what to do, they finally came to the conclusion that we needed to be free from England. And so the founding fathers, representatives from all the different colonies, appointed a committee of 4 to work on a Declaration of Independence so that we could be clear, a cutoff reason and time for us from England. So this committee of 4 was, of course, we know Thomas Jefferson, who wrote most of that declaration. So a lot of this is his wording, but he had the input and the help from John Adams and Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert R. Livingston. Interestingly, Jefferson lifted phrasing from other familiar documents, so the colonists already had a lot of the ideas that are in the Declaration that were familiar to them because they were in documents that were part of their lives. For instance, the Virginia's Declaration of Rights that became part of their Constitution has a lot of the wording that is in the Declaration of Independence, and other documents that were really familiar to the colonists were part of the Declaration. So Jefferson wasn't stealing ideas from other people. What he was doing was using familiar phrases and documents that helped the American citizens themselves to connect in their minds something they already knew and agreed with to this next step of forming a new nation. So we have these 4 men working on this Declaration of Independence. They got this project done in 3 weeks' time. They presented it to the Continental Congress, which, of course, they're all politicians, so they argue and they change things and dumb some things down, but they finally got it all agreed on, voted on July the 2nd in 1776. And then it became an official document for our new nation on July 4th, 1776, which is why we celebrate July the 4th as the founding of our country. Now, these 4 people on the committee and the Continental Congress were not coming up with these brand new ideas like, oh, we got a cool idea. Let's make a new nation on it. No, all of them had studied the Enlightenment philosophers of their time, and they had learned political philosophy that pointed them to the fact that the king who was governing them was not doing so in the best interest of the American people. And so what they did then is they internalized the teachings of the philosophers of their day and directly used the philosophical concepts that they had learned and created those ideas into our country. Like, those philosophic ideas are the underpinnings of our nation today. So one of the major influences of our founding fathers was John Locke. And so if you've done the Constitution course with me, you know that John Locke was one of our top philosophers. And he's a political philosopher. He philosophized about a lot of things in the field of empiricism. So he taught, along with the other philosophers of his time, the concept of natural rights. So John Locke and our founding fathers then believed that people were born with certain natural rights, and these included life, liberty, property, the pursuit of happiness. All right, so you see these words that are embedded in our declaration right there. So here in that introductory sentence that we just read, we see the laws of nature and of nature's God, that we have an entitlement to these laws of nature of life, liberty, property, the pursuit of happiness are some of those natural laws, not all of them, but some of them. And they come from nature and nature's God. And so all people have the rights to these natural rights because they were created in us. So these our founding fathers, Jefferson and his team, were taking these ideas and saying, see, these are philosophical concepts that we all know and agree on. John Locke also taught that humans are subject to what he called a state of nature. And so in our natural state, we humans tend to argue all the time and act in ways that are destructive to others and sometimes even our own self-interest. So thus, with that in mind, people form governments. And so we will see that in our document here, that our government was formed because it is in the best interest of people to have a government. So the purpose of the government is to control, to tamp down, to manage that state of nature and give people protections of their life, liberty, property, pursuit of happiness, their safety, their well-being, things like that. That's the government's role. So the government's role is to protect people's natural rights. In order for the government to be created and to do its job, the people and the government form what Locke calls a social contract. The social contract is an agreement. It's a real contract between the people of a country and the government. And so they're agreeing to work together in a contract. And the government's job is to protect the people's natural rights. The people give up a little bit of their freedom in that they give up the right to take things from their neighbors because it's not really a natural right. And so they need to have less freedom to do everything they want just for their own self-interest, in order to look out for everybody's self-interest. So governments are a social contract of the people. Governments are by nature of the people. So, and governments are there for the common good. Now, the common good is a concept that's not just original to John Locke. It goes all the way back to Plato and Aristotle. And the common good really is, we can quote Indiana University explains it as, we depend on our institutions of government to get it right and to earn our respect while doing so. All right, so the common good here says that in our Constitution that the government is protecting the general welfare and securing the blessings of liberty. So those are natural rights. In order for the government to do that, protecting us to fulfill the social contract, there is a rule of law. And this idea goes all the way back to the ancient Greek philosophers as well. And so the rule of law is a principle under which all people, institutions, and entities, so that's businesses, that's nonprofits, that's the army, that's the navy, every entity, every institution, every person is subject to the rule of law. And the rule of law, according to our US court system, says that laws and the way we run our government and our society should be publicly promulgated. So it means it's well publicized. People know what the laws are. It should be equally enforced. It should be independently adjudicated. That means the court system operates in a way that's independent of the president, the executive branch, the Congress. Like the court system is a separate entity. That's where we get our checks and balances from. All right, and it should be consistent with human rights principles that the world would agree with as well. And so we wouldn't want to come up with discriminatory things in other countries. Say, oh, look, you're not very nice to those people. So as you can see, our country has always had areas of growth where they needed to do better. But anyway, that's the rule of law. Okay. So our founding fathers took these ideas that where they had learned in their studies from John Locke and the other philosophers of the time, that people are born with inalienable rights, including life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. That the state of nature pits people against one another in a way that some people try to take away the property of another or deny the natural rights of others. So governments are formed as a social contract between the people and the government, where the people give up a little bit of their natural rights and the government serves the common good by protecting everyone's natural rights and safety and happiness through the rule of law. And if the government does not fulfill its obligations to the social contract, then the people have a right and a responsibility to form a new government. All right, so we know that this Declaration of Independence was written in three parts. So we have the preamble, we have the grievances, and then we have the Resolution of Independence. And we looked at that introductory sentence and noticed that it incorporates the nature and nature's laws and nature's God, our rights under God and under nature to have our freedoms. And so with that setup in the introductory sentence, then we are going to look at the rest of the preamble. Let's see. I'm grabbing. All right, here we are. So we are up to the premise. All right. So the next sentence in the Declaration of Independence, in that preamble section, is the one that we probably know best. And so it is called, when you study this, the premise, because in those days, everyone was learning a classical education where logic is the foundation of everything that you are learning. So they're learning science, they're learning like history and all the basics, but things are taught to be discussed and thought of in the classic logical process, in which you have a premise and a conclusion. So if then kind of statements. And so we start with a self-evident truth. So the thing is, we know we're talking logic here in classical education because we have a self-evident statement. That means they are going to say a truth that is our premise. This is where we're starting our argument, and it is something that we all agree on. It's a basic law here that is just everybody knows. Okay, all right. So we know that these truths are self-evident. These are the truths that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these natural rights, these unalienable rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So if you notice, they left out property. They were arguing about something there and left pursuit of happiness there. All right. And that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. All right. So we have our the premise is the self-evident logic is people are created equal and they are endowed by their creator by our natural rights. Some of these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then we have the social contract. To secure these rights, the governments are instituted among men. And they derive their just powers, their rule of law power, from the consent of the governed. So the people give the consent. It's a government of the people. So that is our introduction here, our premise. And now, based on that premise, we have to have a conclusion because that's how logic works. All right, so the conclusion to that premise is, so if this is true, and we hold that to be true, it's self-evident, then this is the logical conclusion, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new governments, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. In other words, when the government, the conclusion is, if the government is destructive to the protection of the natural rights, the government is not fulfilling its social contract, then we, the people, it's the right of the people to alter or abolish that government and institute a new government. And the foundation of that government will be back to the social contract, where the principles and organizing of the powers affect the safety and happiness of the people. In other words, it brings about the safety and happiness, the protection of the natural rights of the people. So the government goes back to the people who form a new government that will fulfill the social contract. All right, so based on that, then we have the premise, the conclusion that we don't have anything that we can do about this because logically, England has broken its social contract, and we need to declare independence and to form a new nation that will fulfill the social contract to look out for the people's natural rights. So the next section, then it leads into the grievances. So there are 27 grievances, and we will talk about that in the next video because it just takes a while to get through there, and we can't do that all in one video. But there are reasons, like there's a reason why we believe the social contract was broken, but we can jump to the very end. At the end, the resolution. So, the concluding paragraph of an essay, well, this is that concluding paragraph, and it is our resolve that we are forming an independent country. We are becoming independent of England. All right, so let's read that resolution. That's the concluding paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have the full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. So, as you can see, then, it is not one person wrote this document and we just sent that off to the king. In fact, everybody is signing on to this. We, the representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled, like we are all together in unison, in agreement. All right, and we are sending this letter of independence to the king. You notice that the United States of America, the first word, united, is not capitalized because it's the states of America at that time. They were united, everybody came together, but they were seeing themselves as a group of, like a confederation of states of America, but they're united right now in declaring their independence. All right. And so they're appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world, hoping that that Supreme Judge of the world keeps their intentions right, the rectitude of their intentions. And then they are publishing that they are free. They have absolved all their allegiance. They have made it go away to the British Crown. And because they're free and independent states together, they have the power to levy war, make peace, make contracts, establish commerce, do other acts and things, which the Grammarly did not like that things there. It wasn't specific enough. All right. But independent states can do that because they're independent states. They can do all those things. All right. And then it concludes with the promise that Americans are making to each other in the face of the king, as if, like, king, you think we'll just fall apart, but look, what we are doing, we are pledging to each other in your presence. We are showing you and the rest of the world, and with the reliance on divine providence, that we are pledging our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor to each other. These founding fathers were serious about it, and they were carrying the colonies along in that reliance on each other, and in the firm belief that it was time to dissolve the broken social contract and make their own nation that would support the natural rights of the people, forming a government of the people, for the people. All right. All right, so we will stop here. In the next video, we'll talk about those grievances and why that was important.